It's a Fireside Chat, y'all.
Welcome back to another Fireside Chat where we bring casual technology conversations to you. With us, I've got network architect, engineer extraordinaire, Trevor Butler, and we are talking cloud networking deployments, specifically Meraki. Thanks for being on the show, man.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So Trevor,
Yeah.
specifically around cloud deployments, there's a lot of apprehension. Customers aren't sure how to deploy cloud infrastructure. When you get, let's talk specifically about Meraki, because Meraki is a pretty common cloud technology. When you get a box, a new firewall, let's say, and we're deploying it in a totally greenfield environment, what's the first thing you do?
Well, usually the first thing we do is there is a management port on there, but it's not for console access like we traditionally see.
Okay.
Really, that's just to set the public IP address so we can reach out to the Meraki cloud and get its configuration.
So that's a good point. So when you get a Meraki firewall, let's say we're replacing our internet edge, the first step is you can't just plug it in and it works.
Right.
Okay, so you got to plug in the console, you put a public IP address on it, and then it phones what?
Phones home,
Okay.
it downloads a configuration from Meraki,
Okay.
and then from there you just log into Meraki's cloud controller and just configure away.
And so how does it know that firewall is specifically related to that configuration? Is there some type of association or?
Yeah, so when you actually make the Meraki's kind of cloud controller, you create a network, and then you upload all these serial numbers into the network. So when that firewall, when it phones home, it actually uses the serial number, sends that serial number, and that's how it knows what the cloud controller knows which way or which configuration to send back to the device.
Okay, so it's based on serial
Yeah.
number. Okay, and then so I guess to step back, we're talking greenfield deployment.
Mm-hmm.
We've got now our firewall. We unboxed it. You said we used the console connection to put a public IP address on it. We plugged it in. It's now phoning home. It gets its configuration, and now we go a step behind that. And we start putting the switches in place.
Yeah.
How does that work? Do we need to console into the switches?
No, you don't actually, because the firewalls have run a little DHCP server on there to give out IP addresses. You just start plugging in devices, and it'll naturally get an IP address, phone home, and get its configuration the same way as the firewall.
Now, what happens if you haven't put that serial number in the portal? Does it do anything, or it just kind of hangs out?
It hangs out.
Okay.
It's just kind of a really expensive paperweight at that point until you give it a configuration.
Okay. And then I've heard you can pre-stage configs with Meraki. Tell me a little bit about that.
So the nice thing with Meraki is that you can take the order number you get when you purchase the stuff and immediately build out the configurations.
Okay.
You take that order number, you put it in your inventory, and it automatically will find all the serial numbers in that order, upload it to your network, and then you can just start configuring away.
So if like, let's say I bought 4 switches and a firewall for maybe a new site, and I have that order number, I pop that in, every single device I bought on that order is going to show up.
Correct.
Okay, cool. So I guess walk me through that. So when I'm building the configs, what are things that I need to think about as a user out there deploying these networks?
Well, the big one is that there is going to be a Meraki management network.
Okay.
That is separate from your traditional data networks.
Is this not public? It's not or accessible from the local LAN? This is a private LAN? Or
It can be. So
Okay.
it can be either, a lot of customers will use their own separate management plane or management network for those to ride over. Or they will use just their existing, if they have a management network that other devices need management on, they'll use that as well.
Okay.
The big thing with that is that it has to have public internet access.
And so if there's no public internet access, so let's say, for example, you're turning up a new Meraki infrastructure and there's no internet there, really you can't do anything.
Right.
Okay, so internet's critical when you're deploying these cloud infrastructures.
Very first thing, yeah.
Okay, so that's different than a traditional legacy network where we've got where it's locally managed. in console, you could build all the configs there regardless of internet connectivity. So that's something good to know.
Well, and also the other thing too, in that case, where I've been on a few sites where they haven't gotten internet yet, or the internet's coming in that day, and I still have to like stage some stuff. Is you still can stage the configs. You can still take the device and just give it any old internet connection. So you could take it to another office, plug it in, stage it all, and then transport it. And then you can kind of do some local network testing there because the device now has a configuration.
Got it.
And then once the internet connection comes up, now you can actually live, change configurations and troubleshoot and that kind of stuff.
Okay, so if you don't have an internet connection or the internet connection goes down, the config still, the devices still operate.
Right. Yeah. The only thing you need for the internet connection is for the management plane, is getting the configurations, the configuration changes, doing any live analytics. But as far as like data plane, your LAN traffic, and even technically your WAN traffic as well, doesn't have to go through Meraki's cloud controller.
Okay, awesome. And so I know switch stacking is pretty common now, and there's a couple types of stacking. I believe there's a virtual and a physical. Can you tell me a little bit about those two differences and how they work?
Yeah, so physical stacking is kind of traditional stacking like we see with other vendors, just like Cisco. There's on the back, there's dedicated ports that are only used for stacking, and they use QSFP 40 gig cables to connect all of those together. Now, virtual stacking is actually something kind of interesting that Meraki just started implementing, about a year ago? What it uses is ports on the front. So you could either choose to use those ports as data ports or use them as stacking ports.
Okay. And then what does that do from a stacking port perspective? Is traffic routed over them? Is it used to share configs, or does that all just come from the cloud still?
So all that comes from the cloud as far as configuration is concerned. The big thing to note too is that each switch still actually, from a management plane perspective, still is managed separately. Okay. But the big thing with the stacking, Meraki specifically, is that they will share the data plane as if it is logically one switch. So that reduces the amount of uplinks you need to have because you no longer need an uplink from each, say, access switch to the core. You can stack them and then have two, just for redundancy, back to the core.
Okay. Awesome. And then wireless is obviously where Meraki kind of got its foundation and cut its teeth. We didn't really talk much about wireless deployments, but I assume wireless, if you're deploying the network, wireless works very similar to the switching and all of that?
It's pretty much identical. They follow the same model through all of their products. It calls home, grabs configuration, and you just kind of run from there.
So really the only time you would actually need to plug in a console cable is for that internet edge device.
Right.
All the other stuff that's LAN enabled, as long as it has internet access, it's going to go get its config from the cloud.
Right. And kind of as a caveat to note as well, even if you don't use like the Meraki's firewall, you can still use any of the other devices. It just has to be able to get DHCP access to get an IP.
So in order to get to the cloud, DHCP, internet access, and it just phones home and downloads its config.
Yep.
Okay, awesome. And then from a Meraki config management standpoint, do we need to worry about backups or config backups or logging or any of that, or is that all done?
That's all done by Meraki. And in fact, not just backups, but also firmware updates. So about 6 months ago, they actually put together the ability for you to actually control a lot of that, because in the past, it was just they just upgrade you whenever it felt like it.
Yeah.
And now you can actually schedule not only when the upgrade happens, but also what firmware you want on there.
Nice.
Whether you want to do beta, it can be a beta tester, or to just be on the stable, code. So
if you had let's say a maintenance window, for example, you could plug that maintenance window in. It would basically install or upgrade during that maintenance window.
Yep. And the other thing in that, and what I really like, is that they actually now put notes in there to tell you what these new codes have. So any bug fixes, any new features. It's all transparent now, whereas before you kind of had to do a lot of digging and figure out what was happening.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, I appreciate you being on the show today.
No, I enjoyed it.
Awesome. So we talked a little bit about deploying cloud networks, Meraki specifically. So obviously, if you're deploying that internet edge, you got to get in there with a console, assign an IP address, get internet connectivity, then it'll download its config. All the devices behind it, if they get DHCP and get internet access, they're gonna join the cloud. We talked a little bit about stacking and how that looks. There's physical stacking, virtual stacking, a little bit about what those things mean, and APs kind of work the same way. If there's anything I said on this video that you would like to get more information about, make sure you leave a comment or let us know, or you can email us at firesidechat@lookingpoint.com. Thanks for watching.